Throughout human history, countless cultures, despite their differences in religion, language, or geography, have shared one haunting image: a shadowy figure standing at the edges of morality, whispering temptations meant to lure us into ruin. Some believe this being is the devil himself, an embodiment of rebellion and corruption. Others suggest it's merely the way we personify our own fears and the darker instincts buried deep within us. But there are stories, stretching from the Middle Ages to the 20th century, that blur the line between myth and reality. Today we'll revisit 5 different moments in time where some claim they came face to face with the devil. But first, you'll have incredible luck if you like and subscribe before this video ends. Story 1. Michael Scott, scholar, sorcerer, or man in league with the devil. In the annals of medieval European history, there are figures who seem to stand silently at the boundary between the light of knowledge and the shadow of the unknown. Michael Scott was one such man. Born around the year 1175 near the Scottish border, Michael Scott was a mathematician, an astrologer, and a brilliant scholar during a time when knowledge and superstition often walked hand in hand. It's believed that he studied at Oxford and Paris, 2 of the most prestigious intellectual centers in Europe at the time. But perhaps what ultimately placed him among the most controversial figures in history was his unusual relationship with Emperor Frederick II. Frederick, an ambitious and often scandalous ruler, invited Michael Scott to serve as his personal astrologer at court. But amid the dazzling culture of Frederick's reign, a court filled with philosophers, theologians, and eccentrics from across the continent, Michael Scott stood apart. He didn't just study astronomy and mathematics. He immersed himself in astrology, alchemy, and especially in rituals steeped in the occult. And it was this deeper obsession that gave rise to rumors linking him to the forces of darkness. Many believed that Michael Scott was more than a scholar, that he had forged a secret connection with infernal powers. Some even swore that he commanded a band of supernatural entities known as familiars, which he allegedly sent flying across European palaces each night to steal the finest delicacies from the banquet tables of French and Spanish kings. As strange as that sounds today, in a time when science and sorcery had not yet been clearly separated, stories like these circulated as if they were documented truth. One legend claims he rode a black horse that could cross the English Channel in a single night. Another tells of him summoning a violent storm to drive off pirates, using nothing more than a whisper and a flick of the hand. But perhaps the most bizarre tale is the one in which Michael Scott is said to have tricked the devil himself into building a road. The story goes that his father had been granted a parcel of land and wanted to build a castle on it. But for the castle to be of value, it needed a road connecting it to the outside world. Rather than hire workers, Michael summoned a demon and forced it to do the construction. Whether true or simply a piece of enduring folklore, all of these stories share one undeniable theme. Michael Scott seemed to know more than any ordinary man should. There is one final detail, one that is both unsettling and strangely poetic. It's said that Michael once predicted his own death, that he would die from a stone falling on his head. Terrified that the prophecy might come true, he reportedly wore an iron cap at all times, day and night. But one day, while entering a church, where he was required by ritual to remove his headgear, a stone dislodged from the vaulted ceiling and struck him dead instantly. To some, it was a coincidence. To others, it may have been the final chapter in a long-standing pact with the devil. Story 2. John Dee, Queen's astrologer or a man who spoke with the devil. British history holds within it figures who seem to step out from the hazy boundary between science, spirituality, and the occult. Among them, few are as compelling or as enigmatic as John Dee, a man who was not only a mathematician and royal advisor, but also rumored to have once stood face to face with the devil on a freezing night in Manchester. Born in 1527, John Dee lived during the reign of Elizabeth I, a time when England was rapidly expanding its empire. Dee was a brilliant scholar, fluent in multiple languages and well-versed in astronomy, geography, mathematics, and navigation. He once dreamed of finding a sea route to India using star charts and celestial positioning. He served as the official astrologer for Queen Mary and continued to hold favor under Queen Elizabeth I. At court, John Dee was considered a man of immense intellect, but there was another side to him, one that few fully understood. Starting in the 1580s, Dee became deeply invested in exploring the world beyond, not through the lens of religious belief, but as a form of experimental inquiry into what he described as non-physical entities, spirits, angels, and other forces that most dared not name. Dee believed that it was possible to contact these beings from beyond using specific tools, a crystal ball, a black mirror, and a symbolic system he referred to as Enochian, or the language of angels. And on May 25, 1582, after years of prayer, study, and ritual, Dee recorded in his diary that he had finally established contact with these entities. Of course, there's no way to verify whether that actually happened, but the story takes a far stranger turn when Dee later moved to Chetham's Library in Manchester, a building that still houses a peculiar circular scorch mark on an old wooden table. Locals call it the Devil's Fingerprint. According to legend, during one of his summoning rituals, John Dee inadvertently called forth Satan himself, and in a brief, terrifying moment of manifestation, the devil pressed a clawed hand into the table, leaving behind that scorched circle, not deep, but permanent. What makes the tale even more thought-provoking is this: John Dee was no heretic. He wasn't an enemy of the church. In fact, he was a devout believer, a man who lived, worked, and even served in the local chapel. He simply believed that the visible world was not the full extent of reality. And so the final question may not be whether John Dee was mad or whether he truly summoned something from beyond. The question might simply be, was that mark on the table left by a devil's claw or carved by Dee himself to lend weight to his beliefs? Story 3. Eleanor Cobham, Power Play or Pact with the Devil. The history of England's royal court is filled with scandal, betrayal, and fierce struggles for power. But few tales cast a darker shadow than the case of Eleanor Cobham, a noblewoman accused of using witchcraft to bring about the death of a king. The story unfolds in the mid-15th century, a time when England was racked by instability. The House of Lancaster was in decline, rival factions vied for the throne, and the fear of witches still haunted the edges of the public imagination. Eleanor Cobham was no ordinary woman. She began her life in court as a close attendant to Jacqueline of Hainaut, the first wife of Humphrey, Duke of Gloucester, who was the younger brother of King Henry V. After Jacqueline's death, Eleanor married Humphrey himself, instantly rising to become the Duchess of Gloucester, one of the most powerful women in England at the time. Her rapid ascent drew envy from many, especially as her husband, Duke Humphrey, stood second in line to the English throne. This meant that if misfortune were to befall the young King Henry VI, Eleanor could very well become queen. And then, in a way that history has often repeated, misfortune did arrive. Eleanor was accused of being at the center of a dark conspiracy to assassinate the king, alongside a group of astrologers and so-called witches. According to the charges, Eleanor had secretly enlisted sorcerers and renegade priests to conduct forbidden rituals. Using a wax effigy in the likeness of King Henry VI, they were said to have performed incantations and curses designed to weaken the king's body and hasten his death. The first to be arrested was Roger Bolingbroke, a well-known astrologer. Under the pressure of interrogation, he confessed to contacting demonic forces, claiming he had acted under Eleanor's instructions. Marjorie Jourdemain, a woman known by the ominous title, the Witch of Eye, was accused of crafting the wax figure. She was sentenced to death and burned at the stake. Eleanor herself was spared execution, but her fate was no less severe. She was tried in a special court presided over by none other than the Archbishop of Canterbury. Found guilty of sorcery, she was forced to march through 4 major cities wearing a penitential robe, a public humiliation meant to brand her as a servant of the dark arts. After that, she was placed under lifelong house arrest at Beaumaris Abbey, where she lived in isolation for the next 12 years until her death. On the stormy night when Eleanor was arrested, lightning reportedly struck the castle tower. To the people watching from below, it was a sign. The devil himself had come to collect a debt. So the question lingers: was Eleanor Cobham truly a witch plotting the king's murder through dark enchantments? Or was she simply too intelligent, too close to the crown, and thus became a target in a political game already set in motion? We may never know the truth. But in the flames that consumed Marjorie Jourdemain, and in the cold stone walls that confined Eleanor until her last breath, there may still linger the faint trace of a conspiracy far larger than the world was ever allowed to see. Story 4. Michael Taylor, When Evil Doesn't Come from Hell, but Lives Inside a Man. In 1974, the quiet town of Ossett, nestled in Yorkshire, England, was the kind of place often described as peaceful and pastoral. Narrow streets, old stone churches, and friendly neighbors. No one could have imagined that inside a modest home on the outskirts, one of the most disturbing and tragic possession cases of the 20th century was beginning to unfold. Michael Taylor, the man at the center of the story, appeared entirely unremarkable. A middle-aged, soft-spoken man with a wife named Christine and several children. He was religious, regularly attending services at his local church. But behind that calm demeanor was a storm no one saw coming. It all began when Michael joined a Christian prayer group led by a young woman named Marie Robinson. Under candlelight and hushed invocations, Michael grew unusually close to Marie. And it was around this time that his relationship with Christine began to deteriorate, then quickly spiral out of control. He started convulsing, screaming, and muttering nonsense during prayer sessions. His emotions toward Marie became erratic, affectionate, then hostile, then obsessively drawn to her. And then one day, in the middle of a group ceremony, he suddenly screamed that he was possessed by demons. The church decided to intervene. A formal exorcism was scheduled for the night of October 5th, 1974, at St. Thomas's Church. 2 priests and a support team arrived. What followed over the next 7 hours was a living nightmare. Michael shrieked, spat, clawed at the air, sobbed uncontrollably, and burst into fits of maniacal laughter. He had to be physically restrained to the stone floor of the church to prevent violent seizures. The priests later claimed to have cast out more than 40 demons from within him, each one named lust, lies, envy, hatred, and so on. But by dawn, they were forced to stop. According to them, 3 demons had refused to leave: insanity, anger, and murder. And just 2 hours later, when Michael was released and sent home, those 3 names seemed to fulfill their roles precisely. The scene that greeted Yorkshire police the next morning would stay with them for the rest of their lives. Michael was found wandering the streets naked, covered in blood, shouting repeatedly, "It's the blood of Satan! The blood of Satan!" Inside his home, police discovered the body of Christine, his wife, brutally murdered alongside the family dog, which had been disemboweled. Witnesses said not a single drop of blood remained in the bodies. Whoever did this had either completely lost control or been overtaken by something beyond human. In the trial that followed in March of the next year, Michael Taylor was found not guilty by reason of insanity and was committed to a psychiatric hospital. Public outrage, of course, was widespread. But the larger question still remained. What really happened? Was this simply a case of extreme religious psychosis, worsened by marital trauma and emotional instability? Or was it a true case of demonic possession, like something pulled straight from ancient scripture? Or perhaps worse, was it evidence that the evil we often attribute to demons may in fact be something much older, much closer, something primitive that already lives inside us? Something we can't understand, something we can't explain, but something that's always there, waiting until the day we lose control. Story 5. Johannes Kepler, the brilliant astronomer and the 6-year witch trial. If Michael Scott represents the archetype of intellect persecuted in the Middle Ages, then Johannes Kepler stands as a victim, albeit an indirect one, of fanaticism and collective fear during the Renaissance. Today, his name is forever linked to the laws of planetary motion. He laid the very foundations of modern astronomy. And yet, few people know that at the height of his scientific career, Kepler was forced to set aside his telescope and mathematical formulas to fight an entirely different kind of battle, one that would last 6 years, and whose outcome meant the difference between life and death for his aging mother. In 1615, Katharina Kepler, Johannes's mother, was 68 years old. A widowed woman living in a small German village, she became the target of suspicion when livestock began dying mysteriously and several children fell ill. The villagers blamed her, and the accusations quickly escalated to a potential death sentence. One of the most terrifying charges came from a story that she had roamed neighboring villages in search of someone to exhume her father's body, saw off his skull, and turn it into a drinking cup to be used in a dark ritual. It sounds absurd now, but in the 17th century, a time when more than 50,000 people across Europe were executed for witchcraft, An accusation like that was more than enough to put someone on trial for their life. At the time, Johannes Kepler was serving as the imperial astronomer in Austria. He understood immediately that time was not on his mother's side. So he made a bold decision. He returned with his entire family to Germany, facing down the court, the hostility of their neighbors, and a mountain of legal documents soaked in prejudice. Some say it was Kepler's intellect that saved his mother, but perhaps, more accurately, it was the methodical patience of a scientist. He personally dissected every piece of evidence, challenged each accusation with precise logic and, at times, careful diplomacy. While his siblings chose to remain silent or distance themselves from the case, Kepler never once turned away, remaining at his mother's side until she was finally released in 1621. 6 months later, Katharina Kepler died. She lived just long enough to avoid the flames that had consumed tens of thousands of others in that era, but also long enough to understand one bitter truth, that the human heart, when gripped by fear and suspicion, can be more dangerous than any force of evil we've ever imagined. The stories you've just heard may be legend, or they may be something far more real, but one truth remains. Darkness has always been there, and sometimes it doesn't come from the outside world. It lives quietly within us. Thank you for staying with us until the end of the video. If you're drawn to the strange, the chilling, and the unexplained, don't forget to subscribe, leave a comment, or share this video with someone who enjoys uncovering the unknown. I'll see you in the next story, where the most terrifying thing might be the one you never believed could exist.